Soldiers stand guard right now along the most fortified border on Earth, watching a line drawn by a war most people assume ended 70 years ago. It didn't. The Korean War never produced a peace treaty. The fighting stopped in 1953 under a temporary ceasefire that somehow became permanent, and millions of troops still face each other across it. So what keeps this war from ending? The division began with the sudden collapse of an empire. From 1910 until 1945, the Korean Peninsula existed under Japanese colonial rule, stripped of its sovereignty and resources. When Japan surrendered to Allied forces in August 1945, the sudden power vacuum forced a hurried decision by the victorious powers. Two American officers, working under a tight deadline, used a National Geographic map to propose a dividing line at the 38th parallel. The Soviet military accepted this division, occupying the territory north of the line, while United States forces moved into the south. Initially designed as a temporary administrative boundary to disarm Japanese troops, the parallel soon hardened into a rigid geopolitical frontier. By 1948, the division became permanent, with the establishment of two rival governments. In the south, Syngman Rhee took power as the first president of the Republic of Korea. In the north, Kim Il-sung became premier of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Both leaders claimed total authority over the entire peninsula, transforming an improvised border into a permanent fault line. On June 25, 1950, the simmering rivalry erupted into open warfare. North Korean forces launched a massive coordinated assault across the 38th parallel, catching the South completely off guard. Within days, the United Nations intervened, authorizing a multinational coalition led by the United States to repel the invasion. Yet the initial campaign was a disaster for the defenders. Outgunned and overwhelmed, American and South Korean troops retreated to a desperate pocket on the southeastern tip of the peninsula, known as the Pusan Perimeter. The momentum shifted on September 15, 1950. General Douglas MacArthur executed a daring amphibious landing at the tidal port of Incheon, deep behind enemy lines. The maneuver severed North Korean supply chains, recaptured Seoul, and sent the invaders fleeing north. But the triumph was short-lived. As victorious United Nations forces pressed upward to the Yalu River border with China, Beijing responded. In late October, hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers crossed the river, launching massive counteroffensives that drove Allied troops back. By 1951, after a brutal series of advances and retreats, the front line ground to a halt near the original 38th parallel. The conflict degenerated into a static, agonizing war of attrition, fought in mud and trenches. Amidst this bloody deadlock, the human cost reached catastrophic proportions. Historians estimate that roughly 3 million people lost their lives, the vast majority of them civilians, caught in the crossfire of a peninsula, transformed into a wasteland. In July 1951, delegates gathered in Kaesong, and later Panmunjom, to negotiate an end to the bloodshed. These talks dragged on for 2 agonizing years, paralyzed by a bitter dispute over the repatriation of prisoners of war. Finally, at 10 in the morning on July 27, 1953, the opposing military commanders signed the Korean Armistice Agreement. The signatories included United States General Mark Clark for the United Nations Command, North Korean Supreme Commander Kim Il-sung, and Chinese Commander Peng Dehuai. But one key player refused to participate. South Korean President Syngman Rhee rejected the agreement, fiercely opposing any compromise that cemented the division of the peninsula instead of achieving a unified, independent nation. By its own terms, the document signed at Panmunjom was not a peace treaty. It was a military armistice, a temporary ceasefire designed to halt active combat until a permanent political settlement could be reached. Legally, the state of war remained fully intact. Without a formal treaty, this temporary suspension of hostilities became the permanent status quo, leaving the conflict frozen in place for over 70 years. The 4-kilometer-wide strip of land designed to separate the two armies quickly became the most heavily fortified border on Earth. Instead of a buffer, the Demilitarized Zone turned into a front line for a silent, undeclared war. In January 1968, a 31-man North Korean commando unit slipped across the border, reaching within hundreds of meters of the South Korean presidential palace in Seoul, on a mission to assassinate President Park Chung-hee. Just 2 days later, North Korean forces seized the USS Pueblo, a U.S. Navy intelligence ship, in international waters, holding its 82 surviving crew members hostage for 11 months. The violence routinely threatened to trigger a full-scale return to war. In August 1976, North Korean soldiers attacked a joint work party in the Joint Security Area at Panmunjom, killing 2 United States Army officers with axes. Beneath the surface, the threat was literal. Beginning in 1974, South Korean forces discovered the first of several massive infiltration tunnels, bored deep through the granite under the DMZ, built to funnel soldiers for a surprise attack. These penetrations continued into the modern era. In September 1996, a North Korean Sang-O-class submarine ran aground near Gangneung, sparking a 49-day manhunt that mobilized over 40,000 South Korean troops and left 16 South Koreans and 24 North Koreans dead. At sea, the disputed maritime boundary in the Yellow Sea erupted into deadly naval clashes in 1999 and 2002. This culminated in 2010, first in March, when a North Korean torpedo sank the South Korean corvette ROKS Cheonan, killing 46 sailors, and again in November, when North Korean artillery bombarded Yeonpyeong Island, killing 4 people. Behind the razor wire of the border lies a quiet, multi-generational tragedy. The 1953 ceasefire permanently severed ties for an estimated 10 million family members, dividing parents, children, and siblings with no way to communicate. For over 70 years, postal mail, phone calls, and emails have been completely blocked. The rare, heavily monitored reunion events, organized by the Red Cross, have allowed only a tiny fraction of these families to meet. For just a few fleeting hours, relatives weep and hold hands in designated rooms, knowing they will never see each other again. Most die waiting. Today, the unresolved conflict is not a matter of historical record, but an active, daily military reality. Along the Demilitarized Zone, the temporary ceasefire of 1953 remains the only barrier preventing a return to total war. Across this narrow strip of land, one of the densest concentrations of military power on the planet, stands in a perpetual state of readiness. The South Korean Army fields thousands of advanced main battle tanks and heavy artillery pieces, backed by 28,500 forward-deployed United States military personnel. Just miles to the north, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea maintains a standing force of over 1 million active-duty soldiers, supported by thousands of hardened artillery systems aimed directly at Seoul. This conventional standoff is now overshadowed by North Korea's growing nuclear arsenal and tactical missile deployments, transforming a regional border dispute into a global strategic crisis. Over the decades, periods of diplomatic thaw have repeatedly opened, only to collapse back into hostility. The 2018 Inter-Korean summits briefly raised international hopes of a permanent peace settlement, symbolized by the opening of a joint liaison office in the border town of Kaesong. But the limits of this diplomacy were laid bare in June 2020, when North Korean forces abruptly demolished the multi-million-dollar liaison building with explosives. Without a formal peace treaty to replace the temporary armistice, the peninsula remains trapped in a volatile limbo. Every troop deployment, missile test, and border drill carries the risk of miscalculation, serving as a constant reminder that the Korean War never ended. Today, the DMZ remains a volatile fault line, not a historical monument. As long as a temporary ceasefire replaces actual peace, millions live in the shadow of an unfinished war. This threat is not history, it is tomorrow. Subscribe to explore the next forgotten conflict with us.